Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Well, Andrew, to freedom with a clear conscience, a familiar voice sounded behind the man who had already grasped with one hand the handle of the iron gate, beyond which, one step away, freedom began. The warden turned and looked around with a parting glance at the gray and gloomy institution to which he had given 10 years of his life. In his hand was a medium-sized bag, on top of which was a medium-sized gray cat. It lay quietly and looked at the bugs crawling along the path with interest. And you take the cat. Where would I go without her? She's been with me most of the time. Well, good luck to you. I won't say goodbye. And don't come back here again. Thank you for your kind words, Warden. Andrew thanked me from the bottom of his heart. To a good man, kind words. Go with God. Andrew nodded and went, without turning around. A long time ago, behind the asphalt road, which during its existence was covered with huge potholes and cracks, from which even the most polite drivers became the first broom. Ah, Rossi, let's take a break. I need a smoke. Smoking on the go is bad for you. You know that yourself. Andrew squatted down and had a smoke. Rossi jumped out of the bag, and the complaint hinted that you're watching. We still have a long walk to the bus stop, but look what a beauty. On both sides of the road, 100 meters away, shining wheat fields and sultry hot air. A slight breeze burned the pale skin of my face and Andrew's neck. I wish I could strip down to my underpants before I sunbathed. If only you knew how much I missed the sun. Andrew breathed in the air full of air, which was filled with the scent of variety and wildflowers that replaced one another. Andrew's heart pounded so that at times he stopped for fear of not keeping it in his chest. The sunlight unaccustomedly stabbed his eyes, which slid either from the bright rays, or from the joy overflowing his heart, or from both. At once the soul felt as light as it had probably never felt in my life. He was overwhelmed with feelings that sprang straight from the source into his soul, giving him an air of celebration. Andrew felt like a child who had a birthday today, and he sincerely believed that a wizard in a blue helicopter was about to come to him. When he reached the bus stop, he got a little nervous. A bus full of civilians in colorful clothes, which he had become unaccustomed to, was about to arrive. What kind of look would they give me? How different was I from them? Unwillingly anxious thoughts flashed through his mind. The cat was also visibly nervous at the sight of the approaching bus. More than halfway down the road, she walked on her own, not a step away from her master, as if tied by an invisible thread to his foot. Andrew took her in his arms and began to soothe her. Do not be afraid, Rossi can handle it. I myself am afraid, he said with a smile and stroked the frightened animal. The bus was almost empty. Only 2 old ladies and an elderly man were going, apparently to the gardens. They were all equipped with buckets, rags, and other sharp and even dangerous tools. That's why their eyes were fearless, and even on the head. Andrew handed the money to the driver, having first studied the sign with the rates that hung near him. Payment on the way out, said the driver in a polite voice, already accustomed to such passengers at this stop. After a pause was formed, the driver added, You don't have to pay. You probably have a certificate too. I have a certificate, and I was able to earn money for the road, and you can't send a car with certificates. So take it from me without change. Andrew put out his hand, and the driver took the money. During the trip, Andrew, sitting in the front seat, he exchanged a few more phrases with the driver and quietly drove to the right stop. The street chaos, the traffic, the cars, the voices, and the sounds scared Rossi beyond recognition. The cat began to tear itself out of my hands and wouldn't stop hissing. Now, Rossi, be patient. We'll get a cab and get you home. I hope our apartment is still intact. Andrew's mother, who was his only relative, never waited. She didn't get her son out of prison for a year. Unfortunately, none of the worries about a child go unnoticed by a mother's heart. Probably because it is the most sincere and deepest experience on earth. She was still quite a blooming woman, but the stroke came without warning, and Andrew was orphaned in an instant. His mother's death was a real blow to him. Not being able to say goodbye to her, Andrew was very nervous from a year almost all gray. His 35 years from the back, he looked like an old man. And on the day of his release, he realized by the reactions of passersby that the gray hair at his age was drawing unwanted attention to him. Andrew, for his unhappy life, got used to the strokes of fate and, not hoping for a favorable outcome, just lived in anticipation. What will fate prepare for him this time? But today, once again feeling free, he once again believed that everything can still work out, or at least he will be able to live out his days in peace. After his mother died, Andrew wrote to a neighbor who was the same age as his mother and was friends with her. Not a letter of his began without a big warm greeting to her, and she would often give him a line or two of her own, especially on holidays. This kind woman organized a funeral and even a wake for Andrew's mother. Modest, of course, but from the bottom of her heart, Wendy knew that Andrew was in prison, not for himself, but for his wife, who quickly turned her back on him and immediately found a replacement after the trial. A neighbor had lived in the house since its founding for more than 30 years and had known Andrew since he was a teenager. She knew his wife, and she and Nancy's mother had mourned his imprisonment. The elderly and knowledgeable women read his letters together every day, waiting on the bench for the mail. At the sight of the letter carrier, their hearts were filled with joy, which was so little in their hard life, which passed like that. From letter to letter, from summer to winter. Wendy had no children of her own, nor had she ever had a husband in her entire life. As a young woman, though, she was simply beautiful. Blue eyes clear, light blonde hair, and a figure like a doll. Men were attracted to her almost to the point of retirement, but they all received an unequivocal rejection in the farthest youth one could imagine. Looking at this elderly woman, she had fallen in love with a guy who also loved her. It was on the way to a wedding, and happily ever after. Wendy bought herself a snow-white dress, which at the time was considered a great luxury. The curious groom couldn't stand it and peeked out the window, when his bride, at the request of her friends, showed it to them. As the young Wendy twirled like a snowflake near the mirror, friends oohed and a style admired, and William, her fiancé, peering into the low end of the little house. His eyes looked in that direction on their own, and he couldn't tear his gaze away. No one saw him, and he went home happy. And in the morning, he crashed his motorcycle, colliding with a gasoline truck near the road William was riding on. Someone had burned the trash, and stupid kids rolled up a rubber lid to the fire. The fire quickly spread to it, and it smoked black smoke all around, through which nothing was visible in seconds. It wasn't just a blow to the young valley. It was a cross firmly embedded, and for the rest of her life. People who came out of their homes and arrived at the scene of the tragedy wept, looking at the stuttering, fragile girl whose eyes were so full of horror and grief that it was impossible to look into them. Looking at her, mothers embraced their children and husbands embraced their wives, realizing that only a moment could separate them from death. There was nothing left of William, only one large coal smoldering. At times it flared up again with a whiff of the wind. When young Wendy realized that this was her fiancé, she covered him with her body with a heartbreaking scream. Somehow people ripped this one away from her, not about to bang the incoming torch, and dragged her away. Wendy suffered severe burns and was admitted to the burn unit, where she was hospitalized for quite some time. The first day she was discharged, she took her white dress and a shovel and went to his grave. Her parents were very worried, and her mother walked behind the vegetable gardens to watch. Wendy sobbed, hugging the cross, wiping her tears with her silk basement dress, and then grew into a hole right on the grave with loose earth, buried it. Living in that place became unbearable for her. Sympathetic glances, evil tongues, and fond memories from the past did not let her get out of a deep ennui. In less than a month, Free Cavalry began to hint that the guy is not returned, and it is worth looking around. Beauty and youth were not to be wasted for nothing. Wendy lost all her weight because she wasn't hungry at all to eat, but by a fluke, Wendy's aunt came to visit them from the north. And figuring out what was wrong, she took her with her. Work and a change of scenery became her salvation. And gradually Wendy recovered, believing that there beyond the horizon of her life will meet her loved ones, and of course, with William, and there will be happiness and celebration, and a wedding in that very dress, and only with him, in spite of the loneliness to which she had doomed herself. Her heart did not blossom at all, and every night she looked after someone else's children on the playground outside her house. She knew all those children by name, knew their parents and their grandmothers. She also knew each child's personality and predispositions and talents. Wendy looked after all the children, both rich and poor, and those who even without her had someone to look after, and especially those whom no one looked after. Like any good grandmother, she bought gifts, but distributed them not to her grandchildren, but to all her charges who trusted her with their secrets, sometimes even more than their own parents. Wendy spent half her life working up north in a military town and her retirement accrual. All the local retirees were jealous, knowing that she was a big-hearted person. Andrew cheerfully exclaimed to Wendy, "Come in." You and the mink cat jumped up from Andrew's arms and went off to explore the territory. Sit down quickly at the table. They must be hungry. Why didn't you even warn me? I would have made some pies. How do you like them?" Wendy laughed, betrayed with a pleasant memory. "Now I'm Wendy. I eat pies with any filling, and even without it so thin." And sat down, as it is good that my mother does not see. Wendy sat down on the stool and, wiping her hand with a tear, took a deep breath. "Why did I sit down?" She jumped up, coming to her senses. "Sit, sit, Aunt Wendy. Don't push, don't push. I must be going too. Tired by the time I got there. And Rossi's got to go to the bathroom." "Where is she, by the way?" Rossi called Andrew to her, and in a second she was standing next to me, running her tail along the wall, and quietly calming down at last. "We're not home yet. It's hard to travel with cats." "You bet it is. Did you have to carry her all the way from there?" Andrew smiled. He felt better now, and a smile came over his face, like a cat jumping on his knees. "You have time to sit. I'll clean up after the cat. It's no big deal. Let's wash your hands, and I'll put the kettle on. Let's have a drink. Here I have some cheese and sausage." Wendy reached into the refrigerator and started pulling out everything she had in there. Stop it, Wendy, or they'll take me away from you by the guts. I'm not allowed to throw myself at you right away." "Yes," with a sort of disbelief, she said. "But you're a surgeon, you know best." That's enough. Wendy handed him a clean towel, and Andrew washed his hands. "Look at that loaf. They've opened a new store around the corner. The food is fresh and the clerks are friendly. You'll find out soon enough." Wendy deftly cut up a loaf of sausage and cheese and put everything on plates, placed it on the table right next to Andrew. The hungry man's stomach twisted, and he almost drooled. "Aren't you going to have some?" "No, I know it's hard for you to believe, but even the taste of food changes with age. And if it's all the same to you, I prefer healthy foods. Porridge, soups. Then why do you buy sausages and cheese?" Andrew said as he put a piece of sausage in the cat, which started mewing for a long time. "For breakfast and for the guests. Your mother, God rest her soul, used to come for breakfast. And now, I'll come. The sausage won't go to waste," Andrew said with a smile. "Come, of course, come, you're always welcome. To see me, old lady. I've got all sorts of thoughts in my head. I think I'm going to die. No one will ever know until I smell it." "Really, Aunt Wendy? You'd better put those thoughts to rest. We'll live as long as we have to. I'll bury you. If I don't go sooner, I promise. I'm so grateful for your mother. You spent a lot. I'll go to work and I'll give it back for sure." "No way. God be with you." "Did she have her own money for the funeral?" "She showed me a long time ago where to get it, if anything. Here's my death money. Come here." Wendy went into the room and started calling for Andrew. "I'm not going. Are you out of your mind? I just got back from prison, and you're showing me your savings." Andrew continued to sit on the stool to sleep from the hot tea and the awkward situation. "Come here." I'm telling you, Wendy clutched at his shoulder with her dried neck from age and feared that this arm would just fall apart. Andrew obeyed. "You see, where I put the pillowcase sheet." Right between them, Wendy shoved back out and wrapped the roll and into a handkerchief. "I see me in prison. Just taught that if need be, I think to rob old ladies. The first thing to do in the cage is to look where they just don't have pillowcases." "Yeah, but where do you want to hide it?" The old lady wondered. "I do not know. Wendy, hide it wherever you like. I'll find it everywhere if I have to." "Look, you joker. That's how they taught you to make jokes in prison. I see you have a good sense of humor, so you'll still be alive. And not for another year." The old woman looked at Andrew in disappointment, not finding anything good in this prospect. Subconsciously, she had been bursting with curiosity for years. Would she meet William after her death? Or would all the years of loneliness have been for nothing? She was 90% sure that she would, but the 10% of her doubts had her so wrapped up that the woman, tired in every way, was going to the other world as if on a cruise. And her things were packed and her ticket in hand. But the train had not yet arrived. "Let's talk about it another time. Right now, I really want to go home. Don't mind me, Aunt Wendy, but I think I could do with a good wash after the journey." Wendy looked at his tired appearance, apologized, and handed him the keys. Rossi ran up to Andrew herself, sensing that he was about to leave, and complaining, hinting goodbye, followed Andrew out into the entryway. "But where did Nancy keep the money?" "I don't think I have to tell you. You'll find the receipts there too. I paid everything with my receipts, and I have the receipts. How can I ever thank you? To be honest, I imagined this day many times. I thought that I would come, and there would be debts. And who knows, they might have already broken down the doors." Andrew's eyes sparkled with accumulated tears, and he could not hold back and hugged the old angel, who had been on this earth for a long time. "The best thank you is to see you happy, son. I watered your flowers, too, as if they were my own. Don't you forget, I watered the flowers because they are alive. They remember everything." "Thank you again," Andrew said, and put the familiar key in the lock. His heart snapped as the apartment headed toward him. A stream of slightly musty, drug-soaked air. Andrew remembered what Corval smelled like and cried. The cat ran sniffing around all the corners and lingering shots, not knowing when they would be home again. There behind the gray prickly fence, where many affectionate hands ran their hands over her not-so-thick fur now and then. Andrew's ears felt as if they were plugged. He stood in front of the little nightstand by his mother's bed, where there were more pictures of him than icons. Here he was a little boy, with the newest meters and his mouth open, barely holding a rabbit in his hands, and a bigger one holding a machine gun, which he had never held in his hands again. Andrew turned the photo, which was turned to the head of the bed, and saw himself there, young, smiling, and hugging his mother. "God," he said aloud, and sat down on the bed and cried. Rossi, hearing his master's unfamiliar behavior, came over, and the muzzle still began to rub against his legs. "Does my life mean nothing to you, Lord, and I have to live on this earth, where I have not a single soul left for the sake of some cat?" said Andrew. Looking at the icon and not waiting for an answer, he went into the bathroom. There he found a shallow basin and toilet paper, put it in the corner. Rossi waited a long time for this and immediately fixed her affairs by cleaning up after the cat. Andrew went to the bathroom while the water was filling. He drove his eyes over the familiar and since childhood pattern on the tiles and marveled that even his homemade toothbrush cup, which he had made in elementary school, was standing in its place. With the bathroom at his leisure, the man finally felt like a human being. The unpleasant prison smell had finally left him. It was replaced by pleasant new scents from uncomplicated personal hygiene products. That's great. How great. Ah, Rossi, if you only knew." He turned to the cat, who was used to being spoken to as a human. Andrew so wanted to share his emotions, and the best thing he could do was to make the gloomy atmosphere disappear. The man turned on the TV and opened all the windows he could. How many cars? And what cars? How had things changed? He whispered to Rossi, who had already jumped on the windowsill and was sniffing the flowers. In 10 years of working in prison, Andrew still managed to accumulate a month's salary of the average person. And at this moment, remembering this, he went to the store, but already without flour. Swallows flying overhead pierced the air and made sounds Andrew had long forgotten. Everything around seemed to him strangely alive and multicolored. Now and then, Andrew looked around in amazement, and at the entrance of the store he felt dizzy. Andrew's well-being left a lot to be desired, and he was well aware of that. He bought a small amount of nutritious food and a bottle of light beer. He was just curious to remember what it tasted like, because all he remembered was that it was bitter. "I'll be right there." And then what? He thought on the way. Should I call my friends? What kind of friends are they, if they have not written a single line in all this time? And Andrew's letters remained unanswered. But no, thought Andrew, not today. He went into the house again and developed. A cat was waiting for him on the doorstep, and he got excited. It began to lay down to him. How nice it is to have someone waiting for you at home. Can't you imagine, Rossi? Andrew opened a bottle of beer and froze, sniffed at the neck. He took a small sip and, satisfied, sat back in his chair. The cat curled up in a ball at his feet and started purring. No sooner had Andrew drank half a bottle of beer than a storm of emotions accumulated throughout the day. Deftly, she covered his eyelids, and he drifted off to sleep. He dreamed of a long-forgotten fragment from when he was very young, and life was just beginning to show him its teeth. Already with a gray head, the man sank back into a place where he could only go in his dreams. Andrew, I'm telling you. And why don't you answer me?" Kate looked at Andrew with surprised eyes with dilated glasses, which were ready to burst at any moment, as it seemed to him. "I'm sorry. I was thinking, and I didn't hear you." Kate grasped his right hand so that he would finally turn his attention to her, and said in a quiet tone, "But now we have to go over it all again. You're coming to the concert with me tomorrow." How could I have forgotten that? He thought, looking at Kate's widened eyes, which glowed with enthusiasm. Andrew couldn't say no, even though he wasn't fully prepared for this trek. "Yes, of course, Kate. I'm coming with you." "Hurrah!" joyfully exclaimed the girl. "So, tomorrow we are going. Really, together." Kate was so happy that she couldn't hold back her emotions and spilled them at every step. "Yes, let's go, of course." Anxiously, shifting her thin legs, Kate said at last, "Hurrah." Andrew decided to go out with me. Andrew and Kate had been dating for 9 months, but this was the first time that a girl had managed to get him out to an entertainment event. It was mostly because he was a very private person. He didn't like changes of scene or his favorite places. Kate, on the other hand, was completely different. She liked large groups of friends, fun days spent with friends, and she found it very difficult to sit at home for long periods of time. She found it a boring occupation, and there was no power in the world to keep her locked up. Kate was an ordinary girl, but from an intelligent and well-off family of doctors. Her parents could spend hours discussing various illnesses at home over dinner, and Kate had learned to think her own thoughts during their discussions and not hear what they were saying. "Kate." The girl looked at Andrew playfully and squeezed his hand and said honestly, "I can't understand how you can stay at home for so long. It's boring." Andrew looked down at her because of her height and answered that you have nothing to do at home. That's why you don't find much to do at home. Kate hugged him sharply and continued in a cheerful voice, "Did my words offend you? Come on, don't be offended. We're just so different. It's kind of weird, isn't it?" Andrew hugged Kate back. "You're right. We are very different, but you know, opposites attract each other even more, don't they?" In a shy voice, Andrew said and smiled, "Yes, The girl squeezed her hands even harder. What are you, a spring then? Andrew barely squeezed those words out of his clenched chest. Kate loosened her grip, and Andrew sighed with relief. Well, it turns out until tomorrow. Kate asked. Yes, until tomorrow. By the way, what time? Andrew said in a calm voice, can hardly contain the explosion of contradictory emotions which he tried to suppress and keep to himself. But I would have written it to you again anyway, so you don't have to worry so much. I hear you, but I'll see you tomorrow, Andrew said, crossing over from Tycho. She's more ringing, isn't she? The next day, Kate said goodbye in a cheerful voice and went home. The door closed, and Andrew walked home through the evening streets, helped by the glowing asphalt in the light of the night lights, and disappeared into the darkness. It was morning again. I am sleepy. Grudgingly, he muttered. The alarm clock roused. Just as he opened the phone, a message from Kate at 5 p.m. immediately popped up. Don't forget at the gate. Andrew arrived at the place a little before the appointed time, and he had to wait. The girl was 17 minutes late. For some reason she was late, asked the guy angrily. Sorry, the bus let me down. Let's go, Kate said with a guilty look. Andrew and Kate went to the park where the concert was held. On their way, they saw many familiar places, and they began to remember moments from the past and discuss them. They arrived quite quickly and were in time for the concert. The young couple took their seats, and a very interesting show began, at which Andrew felt a little aloof. There were a lot of young people, since the tickets were inexpensive, and this park was very popular with them. Kate, on the other hand, was much more fun than usual. You could tell by her eyes how much she enjoyed such events. In fact, her black eyes literally sparkled with a yellow cast. Looking at the stage, after the concert, as always, Andrew went to see Kate off. But there wasn't much time yet, and they sat down in the park on the farthest bench that was always empty. Andrew, did you like it? Was it disturbing? Kate asked. Andrew looked at her worried face and can hardly contain his laughter, answered yes. Look what I brought you. Andrew took something from his pocket, which was small and dark and impossible to see in the dark. Is it a ring? Asked the educated Kate. No, just a pendant so far. Of course, I don't know if you'll wear it or not, because it's old-fashioned and unsightly. Of course I will. What difference does it make? After all, it was given to me by you are essentially a foam. Kate snatched the pendant out of his hands and began to look at it. She stopped talking. Didn't like what? My grandfather made it for my grandmother, shyly said Andrew himself. The girl was surprised. Yes, he made it himself on the loom. He told me himself. Wow, that's really something. Okay, so no one else has one of those. Kate squeezed it in her hand, as if she'd been given a diamond. I don't think so. Uncertainly, Andrew answered, not being 100% convinced. Do you know I love you? Kate asked, in a trembling voice. I hope I do. Because if I don't, why should I go on living? Andrew wanted to say something else, but an excited Kate kissed him, and that kiss drove all thoughts out of his head. The late evening was so warm that when they reached home, the lovers turned around and went to the river. It was there that Andrew learned for the first time what intimacy was. And so did Kate. His dream was so vivid and believable that he didn't doubt one bit that it was me. But he slammed the window shut with force, waking Andrew up in his chair and the cat at his feet. I would dream such a thing, as in reality. And why only this window so slammed to sleep? I dreamt the happiest moments of my life. Is that what love means? Don't look at me like I betrayed you. She went to another city, and I never knew anything else about her. What difference does it make now? We were 18 at the time. Where are my 17 years? There was a knock on the door. Well, Rossi, someone needed us. Andrew opened the door, and on the threshold there was a dry, brave man, smiling as if he were an old acquaintance. Greg, is that you? Andrew exclaimed cheerfully. So you recognized your classmate and friend. I knew it too. When I saw you from the bench in front of the store, I guess you're not you, but welcome back." The man stretched out his sweatshirt, from under which a bottle of whiskey was flaunting. "Come on in, Greg. You know I ain't got much to give you. I just came from the sanatorium myself," laughed Andrew. "And how many years have you been in the sanatorium?" Greg squinted at the gray hair of his classmate. 10 years from bell to bell," Andrew said sadly, pouring himself a cup of tea. "They gave you a good cure, didn't they? Your head is all white, and it's because of that disease. Damn it. No sooner had you out of court than she was walking around with a pack. You know what to say, don't you?" "I don't know, and I don't want to know. There's no point in dredging up old stuff now. 10 years have passed and time has put everything in its place." "No way, Andrew. How much you lived with her for a couple of months. And it was worth it to spend 10 years of my life behind bars, who I didn't see her with after you. And then imagine, she married a general and left for a general. It's unbelievable. Sometimes she comes to her mother's, and she's so sure of herself, as if she'd never met me. She's forgotten how she used to smirk at me. I wish she'd come to your mother once and ask about you. Did you get her out of her sentence? William and I saw with our own eyes that it was she who stuck a splinter in his throat. And she didn't even once. Come on, stop it. Let's not talk about it," Andrew said sadly and found a small glass and poured the guest a whiskey. "I do not understand. Are you going to drink tea?" I looked at him surprised. "Greg, yes, I absolutely must not drink tea. Otherwise, something will happen. I know my destiny, and I don't want to play with it. There's a beer standing, and I didn't even drink it. I have to go to the police station and look for a job as soon as possible. So I'm sorry. Look, you're strong, though. I can't live without whiskey. I don't drink for a day, and I don't enjoy life." Greg drank a glass of whiskey as if it were living water. And again he started to ask me, why was he given so much time? 10 years, and he appeared to be a colonel. Andrew answered reluctantly and tried to change the subject. "You'd better tell me about yourself. I told you not to tell about the past. Live." Andrew gave Greg the kind of wolfish look which only high-security prisoners do. And Greg felt a kind of fear incomprehensible and inexplicable. "Sorry, no more," he said in a low voice, and poured himself another whiskey. Greg told Andrew all the news that had happened in 10 years, and after finishing his whiskey, he could hardly get dressed. It was already deep into the night, and Andrew wanted to see him off so he could go to bed and watch his drunken friend. After such a fast-paced day, I didn't feel like it at all. All the more so because the whiskey had loosened his tongue, and he started talking about Andrew's ex-wife again, Molly, whom he did not want to hear about. Andrew, of course, was curious to know how she had lived all this time. He wanted to see this other side of the coin. But the more he heard about her, the more it hurt him. After seeing the unexpected guest off, he lay down and closed his eyes. Rossi was nodding off flowers in his mother's room. Andrew lay down out of habit in the hall, as he had done before. In this 2-room apartment, he and his mother lived alone. Of course, it wasn't a mansion, but there was no place on earth where he felt more comfortable. Early in the morning, Andrew opened his eyes and twitched. Before his eyes was not the prison ceiling on which he knew every crack, but the very one he had longed to see for a very long time. Am I really home? The man reached out and stood up. Andrew knocked on Wendy's door and asked if he could buy her some bread or something too. Get some, son, get some. I'll just give you some money. Anything else Aunt Wendy can think of. Tell me what you need. I'll be off in a jiffy. I still have the money. I'll start looking for a job today. Good for you. Mother would be so happy. Maybe she's happy in heaven. Did Greg come to you yesterday with a bottle? Wendy asked. Can't you hide anything from me? I ain't got nothing to hide. I don't drink, you know. That's right, son. You keep away from whiskey and you'll be all right. Thank God. What will Aunt Wendy? I have everything in the past. So are you. Are you trying to compare yourself to me? You're just starting out in life. you're 37. And if you subtract the 10 they took from you, you're 27. Wendy laughed, and her laughter made Andrew feel lighter. Maybe you should come in, though. No, he said no. Man, then take me a loaf. It tastes so good. I showed you yesterday, remember? Wendy forcefully slipped Andrew the money, threatening not to ask for anything else. And he left. Andrew looked around the store and marveled at the abundance that littered the grocery store counters. He simply could not believe his eyes. Everything was like in a fairy tale. Oh, if only I had money, I would stock up, thought the man, and took the shopping basket and began to stroll around the store, studying the prices. Where have you been all this time? My stomach is already stuck to my back. I have not had breakfast today. It's lunchtime already. Wendy reprimanded me by taking bread from Andrew. You should have gone yourself. Where are you going? Let's go to breakfast. Wendy grabbed him by the elbow and dragged him into her house. I'm sorry, Andrew, but I'm not used to eating breakfast alone. I used to drink your teas with my mother. Now I guess I'll have to have it with you. I'm too old to change my habits. Andrew was embarrassed, but leaving his bag of groceries by the door, he could not refuse such insistent hospitality. When do you only have time to do everything? He asked the old lady, looking at the table, on which a deep bowl full of cabbage pies was flaunting. How do you like it? Wendy said lovingly and stroked him on the back with her warm battery-like hand. Sit down, son. Eat up. I poured the tea a long time ago, too. It's getting cold. You want it hot. There's no one on the dowel. It's like a fairy tale, Aunt Wendy. You don't have to do anything else. You've already done so much for me. What else am I supposed to do? I had to go to the store to get some bread. The girl's a good worker. She's expecting a baby. An orphan herself. She's giving me the milk that's out of date for pies. And I have a lot of time. I'll bake them at lunchtime. Let them eat them in good health. How good are the pies? Thank you for everything. Andrew thanked me and went home to organize his life. In the closet he found a large sum of money, which apparently his mother had been saving all her life. Andrew's heart burst into an unexpected joy, but then sadness set in again. Mother, she apparently denied herself everything. He had never asked her for parcels or packages in his whole life, knowing that her pension was not much. Andrew lied in his letters that they were fed very well, and that he had everything he needed to live. Only occasionally did he ask his mother for the essentials he couldn't do without: razor, soap, and toothpaste. His mother, of course, also managed to shove a few chocolates and other sweets from her for brand and cigarettes, to which Andrew always sent a huge thank you. At the beginning of his term, his mother was still working and feeling well, so the women were not stingy with the transmissions and parcels. But then her health got worse, and half of her pension was spent on medicine and utility bills. Now you and I have money, thanks to my mother. Even after death, I get help from her. Sadly, he told the cat, and poured into her bowl-bought food. Wow, like at the stove, he said, looking at Rossi, and began to settle in. It had been a month since Andrew had returned home. He got a job at a construction site where they were very surprised that a man with a medical degree had come to work for them. Andrew had never even tried to work as a surgeon in his specialty before. In the distant past, he graduated with honors from the institute and showed great promise. However, one fateful night plunged him to the bottom, where hope for a bright future melts away. The article for murder, moreover, of a law enforcement officer forever put an end to his career, and a 10-year sentence took the best young years out of his life and a significant part of his health. Even at the construction site, Andrew was taken cautiously and there to keep an eye on him. Said the foreman to the worker they put him with to pour concrete. I don't think they would have hired him on that site either. A serious construction company that built high-rise buildings could hardly do without a criminal. It was the criminal that he was to almost all the strangers. And it never occurred to anyone who knew of his imprisonment that they were facing a noble man, one of those few on earth. A man who had taken the blame for a drunken bride who, late one night on her way home from her friend's house, had attracted the attention of a drunken man too, who had begun to harass her insistently. But Andrew was lucky. The construction site was over. The workers had been discharged, but the people who did the work found serious defects that needed to be corrected as quickly as possible. And then Andrew came along, having called through an ad. The foreman began to notice that the man in front of him was of high moral character, decent and punctual. Andrew tried to weigh his every word and then utter every word he said to his fellow workers. But in such a difficult period for the foreman, Andrew turned out to be a real nugget. And after a month of work, they were already drinking beer to celebrate the completion of the project. The foreman whiskey, and Andrew drank tea at the construction site. He easily replaced any worker, grasps on the fly. What needs to be done? The foreman, after counting Andrew on the money, promised him that as soon as they started on the new site, he would be officially employed. Shouldn't we walk, Rossi? Andrew looked at the cat with a good mood. It had put on a lot of weight after a month in the wild. He had finally had a long-awaited day off after a month of continuous hard work, which began at dawn and ended when it was already getting dark. Are you right, Rossi? For starters, we need to clean up. You and I have a lot to do, don't we? Andrew looked curiously at the layer of dust on the TV and went to get a rag. The apartment no longer smelled like medicine. It was now dominated by the smell of men's cologne, which tasted pleasant. The flowers on the windowsills gave it a cozy atmosphere. And Andrew, with his music, no longer felt a sense of loneliness. The new job allowed him to find a couple of people with whom he had the same views on life. And Andrew often called them and talked to them at length on the new phone he bought. The first advance was the money his mother had left him. Andrew decided not to squander it. Let it lie there. Life is long. It would still be useful for the right thing. In the evening, he finally finished cleaning the apartment, took a shower, and sat down contentedly in an armchair in front of the TV. The feeling of cleanliness and order pleased him very much, and he enjoyed a pleasant fatigue. A knock on the door puzzled Andrew, and he went to open it. Wendy was standing on the doorstep with a plate of pies and asked in a guilty voice, "Son, will you watch TV? The channels are out of order, and it's too late to call the tuner. I must have pressed the wrong button again." "Of course I will, Aunt Wendy, and thank you very much for the pies." Andrew carried the plate and made his way to his neighbor's apartment. The man went into the room and found that Aunt Wendy was not alone in the apartment. On the couch, next to the TV, was a young girl of about 18 who had a slightly noticeable round belly. "Meet Andrew. This is Cindy. Remember I told you she works in the store around the corner?" "I remember," Andrew smiled. It had been a long time since he had seen a girl at home. It had been a long time since he had seen a girl so beautiful. Andrew liked Cindy at first sight. This had never happened to him before. Not even with his first girlfriend, Kate, whom he had been madly in love with. Andrew had never felt this way before. He started to adjust the television, and in his thoughts he wanted to sit down even closer to Cindy, next to whom he felt for some reason. He felt it in his heart. Cindy was a modest girl. Her charming smile was like a sip of cool water on a sweltering afternoon. Having quickly managed to cope with the television, Andrew hurried to leave. He was frightened by his strange feelings and surprised at how he felt. When he got home, he looked at himself in the mirror and was once again convinced that nothing could connect him to this girl. White gray hair, through which came the ones that hadn't yet been touched. The gray didn't blend well with his still young face, though already sunburned. He looked younger than his 37 years, but it was nothing compared to Cindy's impeccable youth and freshness. "So what if I'm getting old?" "So what? It doesn't mean I can't find another person pleasing," he said, and turned on the television again. The next day, Wendy called him in the morning for breakfast, and Andrew went. "What do you think of the Polish girl?" she asked, sitting at the table. "She is a wonderful girl. Just top-notch," answered Andrew as he ate his sandwiches. He was used to dropping in on Wendy, to help her do the little household chores that were no longer a burden for the old woman herself. I feel sorry for her. She was an orphan, with no one to help her. And then there is the trouble of waiting for the baby. And I thought it seemed to me, Andrew thought. And how old is she? 19. Look, you can't tell at once. She looks younger. She's skinny. I feed her pancakes and pancakes and pancakes. It doesn't look like it's a good idea. Is she married? Andrew asked. No. How could she be? If she were married, I wouldn't worry about her. She got pregnant. She didn't say from whom. I don't feel comfortable asking. All I know is that he's married and he's not going to leave his wife. Why should he? She got mixed up with a married man. Andrew was surprised. And who knows her? Maybe he was hiding it. Who can tell you, men? But Wendy, men are not always to blame either. Andrew stressed from his own life experience. Not always, of course. You're an example of that. That's why I've been pondering. It would be nice if you two could get along. Really, Aunt Wendy? Are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? She's just a girl. Andrew stopped eating and was about ready to leave. It even seemed to him that the old lady had been watching TV or had gotten senile. What's the big deal? What's the big difference in age? You're way out of her league yourself. What did you see in prison? But you're reliable and decent, and you don't drink. And you have an apartment, and she rents a room. I don't know when the state will give me one. And you've got to raise a child somewhere. Aunt Wendy, if you'll excuse me, I have to go. My cat's waiting for me. I brought her cats 3 times, and she didn't like any of them. And you want to get people together. It won't work. And I haven't seen much good from women in my life. I don't need anything but peace of mind. Andrew went to the exit and hid behind the door. Actually, he was thinking about trying to start a family again. He wouldn't even mind at all if the woman had children. But this Cindy, though he liked her unconditionally, seemed like a child himself. Andrew got a call from the foreman asking him to wait a week for the job. What did the man agree to? The pantry. He found his old spinning rod, and he wanted to get out into nature. As long as there was great weather and a weekend outside. The first trip to the river turned out to be a success, and inspired by the successful fishing, Andrew brought Rossi perch for most of the week. During that week, Wendy wanted to lure the neighbor to her house a couple of times while Cindy was visiting, but each time he wasn't home. So the old lady gave up the idea. 2 days before work, Andrew decided to relax. A fellow builder came by and they decided to have a beer and fish. Before the start of the new facility, Mike's so-named partner was not an avid liquor drinker, so he came to visit Andrew with a couple of cans of beer, which they drank for over an hour. So I'll go get another beer. What kind of fish do you want? Andrew asked Mike, who was staring at the TV where the soccer match was on. Take whatever you want. I don't know anything about it. Whichever one's easier to clean, you take it. Mike was so engrossed in soccer that reality partially ceased to exist around him. Smiling well, Andrew said, watching Mike as if he were frozen in his chair and watching TV without even blinking. He himself had never been a soccer fan, and he was always surprised by this kind of passion in people. When Andrew went outside, it was quite dark. The street lights were about to come on, and there was a chill in the air that made him thirsty. Grasshoppers were rolling in the grass along the curb, and the stars were already lighting up in the sky. Andrew walked slowly, enjoying the chill of the night. He took his time, knowing that Mike wouldn't be able to tear himself away from the TV anyway. And there was still the second half ahead. On the way to the store about 20 meters away, Andrew thought he heard someone moaning. He stopped and listened attentively, but he heard grasshoppers. It sounded like grasshoppers. Andrew thought and quickened his pace. When he had taken 5 steps, he heard moaning again, which was heard quite nearby. In the dense thicket of the wedge, which had grown so large that nothing could be made out. "Who is there?" asked the man. And hearing the sobs, he went forward. The streetlights came on, but there was still an unattractive darkness in the thick bushes. Andrew remembered his phone and began to light the way. At the very end of the thicket by the old fence, a girl was lying there, shuddering, letting out, interrupted by a moan. Andrew was frightened by it, removed the cold sweat. When committed to the girl, he saw Cindy. She was lying with a knife in her belly, her gaze fixed on the starry sky. Cindy called softly to her Andrew. It was as if the girl had not heard him, and it was clear to her that her soul was about to fly to where her gaze was fixed on her. In the distance you could hear the voices of young people, and Andrew at first wanted to call them for help, but suddenly they were the ones stabbing her. Andrew began to call an ambulance, visually inspecting the wounded area and assessing what he presumed to be loss of blood. He detailed everything to the dispatcher and asked them to hurry. He laid Cindy down and bent her knee. "Be patient, honey," I now said to her, and rushed to the store. The saleswoman was horrified when she saw the bloodied Andrew with frightened eyes. Somebody had told her he'd done time for murder before, and she held her breath and leaned against the wall. "Give me the first aid kit." "The man is dying," Andrew shouted. The saleswoman shook her head and, unrelated, pronounced, "We don't sell first aid kits. You probably need to go to the pharmacy." And she furthered, "You must have a first aid kit." Andrew shouted again. "Not on sale, but in the store." Oh, and how the saleswoman realized what was required of her, and she ran into a small office, from which she brought some kind of a box. Andrew snatched it up and fled through the door, probably wanted to kill someone, and then changed his mind. The saleswoman thought to herself, and with trembling hands pressed the security button. The guards arrived very quickly, but after listening to the salesgirl and making sure that there was absolutely no threat to the store's property, advised her to call the police and left. The saleswoman pondered for a long time, but remembering how much time she would then have to spend in the store testifying, she changed her mind. Someone would be called. After all, he just asked for a first aid kit and blood. I don't know, maybe he cut himself. After catching her breath, she began to call, but not to the police, but to her friends, describing the encounter in vivid colors. Andrew opened the first aid kit, which of course contained the bare minimum. Cindy was still breathing, which pleased Andrew, and he began to fix the knife. He made a roll of bandages, which immediately turned purple. "Jesus," cried Andrew. "Where is the ambulance?" He ran out onto the road and looked around confusedly. His phone rang and popped up. "Mike's number. Where do you go?" "Already ran out. I got a force majeure here." "I'll call you later," Andrew said. Mike understood nothing of the noise and heard the sound of the siren. He ran towards the car and started waving his arms. The driver guessed and followed him. 3 minutes later, they were loading Cindy onto a stretcher. "You would have come with us," the paramedic said. "We'll have to talk to the police about the stab wound, you know." "Of course," answered Andrew, and got into the car. The road was shaking a lot, and he was experiencing every bump along with Cindy. "A drink," she said, barely audibly. "Cindy, you can't. Just wait till you get to the hospital. Do you two know each other?" "I take it?" the felcher asked incredulously. "Yes, she comes to my neighbor's house to see Wendy." Hearing the name Wendy, Cindy began to toss and turn. "Lie still." The paramedic looked at the wound and asked Andrew, "Are you a doctor?" "I studied a long time ago, but I never had a chance to work," he answered, not wanting to talk about it. "Why not? You would have made a good doctor, judging by the way you fixed the folks' subject by such a meager quantity." "Yes, I'm still after the institute." "True, they don't give you a certificate there," Andrew said, and regretted it as he watched the paramedic change her face. Cindy turned to the felcher in a frightened field voice. "Who put the knife in you?" "She's not allowed to talk." "Why do you ask?" Andrew got angry and stared at Cindy's chest. On her chest was the locket he had given Kate years ago. Andrew couldn't believe his eyes. Maybe it was similar. He scrutinized every detail of it and was convinced of the opposite. Andrew went pale and kept his eyes on her breasts. "What are you staring at?" asked, unable to stand the paramedic. But Andrew didn't even hear her. His heart was pounding like a rail on a train. Tears streamed down his face as he stared into Cindy's features and found Kate's and his own in them. "Are you crying? Are you insane?" asked the daring paramedic. Because they had already pulled up to the emergency room. A crowd rolled out of the car, and a woman was leaning over Cindy in a quiet, barely audible voice. Asked who stabbed you. Cindy shook, and then said only he, and lost consciousness. You heard the paramedic scream. Everyone did. He stabbed her, and then he called an ambulance, as if he'd found her. Probably knew where to put the knife, so she wouldn't survive. Andrew looked at the paramedic with crazy eyes and did not understand what was happening. In his mind, he was quite far away with Kate, whom he remembered all his life. She was his first and only love. The paramedics escorted Andrew into the office, where an investigator was already waiting for him. The sight of the uniformed man quickly brought Andrew to his senses, and Andrew finally realized that he was once again facing a murder charge. Andrew began to think about his every word. "And your friend Mike, do you think? Is he still at your house?" asked the investigator. "I guess so," answered Andrew. They didn't let him go until the morning. And in the morning, when Cindy's condition became steadily serious, he was released on his own recognizance. Interviewing Mike, who never waited for his beer, "You shouldn't be released at all. And why wasn't I the only one who went with you?" Mike grumbled, getting ready to go home. "I passed out right after you told me something was wrong. Maybe I'm in the habit of watching soccer at home too. They knocked me out." Mike said something, and Andrew was short of breath. Could it be my daughter sounded in his head? And Kate's sweet facial features flashed before his eyes. Andrew knew he wouldn't be allowed to see Cindy, but he had a passion. How he wanted to be closer to her. After taking a shower, he soaked his clothes in the basin, and the water immediately turned burgundy. Who had trimmed it? Andrew asked himself over and over again, and then he gathered himself and walked outside the hospital for a long time. Look, walking again. No shame, no conscience. And why had they let him go at all? The paramedic stared out the window in amazement. She was waiting for another call and decided to have tea and a sandwich during the break. Andrew came close to the waiting room and stood right next to the window. "No, but you just look at least a complaint to the prosecutor's office, right to this police. There's the killer walking back and forth. He's probably biding his time, waiting to get her to the hospital and finish her off so she doesn't have to testify." Curiosity piqued in the surgeon who operated on Cindy, and he went to the window. "Andrew, we were at the institute with him," Max said, and went to the exit. "Hey there, buddy." I heard the sound of Andrew behind me. "Max." Andrew was surprised to see a man in a white coat. "You are here. It's a miracle. Can you imagine how happy I am to see you?" Max had heard from his acquaintances that it was not Andrew's fault and believed it, because throughout their friendship, Andrew had always taken responsibility in the company. He even once almost got expelled from the university for one improper thing. But then it turned out that he had nothing to do with it, and he only kept silent so as not to betray his comrades. They exchanged news, from which Andrew learned that Max had 2 children and had married Jenna, who was in the same class as them. "You know, I think I have a daughter too," Andrew said sadly. "What do you mean by that?" Max was surprised, and then he listened to Andrew's story. "But my friend, you are really something. Although nowadays it is not a problem. The expertise can be done in almost every clinic now. Even in our neck of the woods this service is. Can you organize it?" Andrew asked. "The procedure, of course, paid, but in view of the circumstances, I think I can lend you. Moreover, now I myself have become curious. Is she your daughter or not?" Andrew was visibly pleased. They exchanged telephone numbers. Max had no doubt that Andrew would give him the money, and after paying the receipt for him, he sent him to take the tests. "So that's it," Max Andrew said. "In 10 days, the result will come to your email. and you can pick it up on paper in about 2 months. Thank you very much, buddy. How's she doing? Cindy is alive. Her condition is serious. The baby couldn't be saved, of course. You know, you don't have to explain. Andrew walked home with a strange feeling. There were so many thoughts in his head that he sped up his step, and once home, began to prepare himself lunch for work, which he had to start the next day. The closer the date of the examination was approaching, the more nervous Andrew became. And then 9 days later, he saw a letter in his blank email. Opening the paternity test, he was dumbfounded. Passing by the workers, it was unfamiliar to see the always poised Andrew crying almost heart-rending near the brickwork. Had someone died? A curious Mike came up to him. No, answered Andrew and laughed, realizing the absurdity of his tears from the outside. He worked that day in a confused state, and at the end of the day on a smoke break, he shared his joy with his close colleagues, who congratulated him heartily by sending him to Max. He sent him the results of the examination as well. What shocked your childhood friend? Your daughter is on the mend. I think we'll have her out in a week, Max texted him back. Andrew looked again at the phrase your daughter and wept. But who cut her off? Andrew asked Max, hoping that the situation had cleared up. Don't you know yet the father of the child? They have already taken him into custody, probably for a long time. That rascal also held her mouth, so she wouldn't scream until she was completely weak. That's probably why he forgot about the knife and his fingerprints. All right, I'll see you later. I got the surgery. Andrew's heart is relieved. How's the daughter? She's fine, but will she be happy to know I'm her father? Would she need me after all these years? Heavy thoughts saw in Andrew's heart and fear began to grow in him. What if she tells me to go to hell? And then how would I live? The animals knocked, and Andrew went to open the door. Already on the doorstep, he knew it was Wendy. Hello, Andrew. How do you do? She asked in a low voice. Are you always allowed? Come in. Wendy went into the room and, looking at the flowers, said, I did not come to you for nothing. I said, Aunt Wendy, don't be shy. Do you remember the Cindy girl I grabbed for you? I do. She was stabbed. The baby's father, they say, is a murderer in the hospital, and she's in serious condition. I'm certainly not going to get there, but you're young, please go. I understand that you just got off work, but you can eat there until 8 p.m. I made some noodles too. Sure, I'll go. What are you talking about? Wendy hustled out of the house, brought a small bag in which a can of chicken broth was wrapped in a towel. Wendy hadn't forgotten about the bread and the spoon either. Andrew bought gas-free water from himself and some unwholesome foods for Cindy to eat. At the hospital he met Max, who curiously pulled him aside. What did you tell her? He asked in a low voice. No, of course not. I have not seen her yet. How do I tell her? And will she be glad to hear it? That is also a big question. I brought you a package. A neighbor gave it to me. What neighbor? Are you the father or not the father? Although my father saw the expertise himself, laughed Max. Come with me. He turned to Andrew. What's the big deal? What's the holdup? You don't have to tell me if you want, but we have to see each other. You have to start somewhere, especially since you know each other. I agree. Andrew exhaled, and they went to the check room. There Andrew was given a white coat and warned that the date is limited and you cannot stay there for a long time. But I don't need to be there for long. Andrew thought and followed Ma, who volunteered to show him the way. When he reached the room, the man's hands shook. He walked in and saw Cindy lying staring out the window, just as she had been that ill-fated night, looking at the stars. Hello, said Andrew quietly in a trembling voice, and sat down beside her on the bed. Now he was not ashamed of himself for being attracted to her like a magnet. Cindy looked at him in surprise and said hello quietly too. Is it bad at all? Andrew asked, and without waiting for an answer, continue to you here. Wendy passed broth to eat. It will give you strength. Cindy looked indifferently at the package and said, What do I need strength for? Here you have saved me. After all, I was 2 steps away from freedom. Why should I live? For whom? My baby died. The girl cried. And I would have been better off dead. You saved me for nothing. I'm going to die anyway. Only now I'll have to start all over again. Do you know how hard it is to die from the beginning? Andrew listened to his daughter and heard himself in her, turning away from the window. He didn't want her to see his tears. But at some point he turned to her with his wet face and said, I thought the same as you. And then I found out that while I was thinking like that, my daughter lives somewhere far away from me, who has my eyes and has a mole on her cheek too. She wears a pendant that I gave her mother a long time ago. I've resented her all my life for being gone forever. Who would have thought that the most important thing we might not know? But Cindy had tears running down her cheeks. She guessed, but was afraid to ask. And yet she mustered up the courage to ask, Are you really my father? Without a doubt, Andrew answered and hugged his daughter. Did you really get along? Asked Wendy Andrew when she called him for breakfast again. Andrew searched the dresser and gave her the results of the examination, which he printed out to show Cindy. What I didn't know how to tell her yet. What is it? Wendy asked. Why don't you read it? And we'll be right with you. Oh dear. A noise came from behind the wall. What on earth is that supposed to mean? That's news. That's news. What a joy to find his own daughter after so many years of traveling. Andrew stepped out on the doorstep and took a deep breath of fresh air. No, his life is not over. His life is just beginning, and he will do his best to make his own daughter the happiest in the world.